Welcome, everyone, to the June 17th Eugene City Council work session. Welcome, everyone that's here and at home. We have two items up today. The first one is dealing with the ordinance concerning sick leave. The city attorney is going to present us with some possible options.
So you have the options that you have available to you is adopting the council bill that was in your packet. It's Council Bill 5143, and that was the ordinance that was in your packet on Monday, which is an ordinance that will delay the implementation of the sick leave ordinance until October 1st, 2015. And that was written prior to the Senate Bill 454 being passed by the legislature that has a January 1, 2016 date in it. So I have some motions for you that would change that October 1, 2015 date to be January 1, 2016 to coincide with Senate Bill. We also have a motion, if it is your desire, to have an automatic repeal section added to the sick leave ordinance that would, if it is signed by the governor, if Senate Bill 454 is signed by the governor and not referred to the voters, then it would automatically repeal your sick leave ordinance. And those two provisions are to prevent the need for additional public hearings. The bumping it out, if we leave it at October 1, we'll come back to you in the fall and ask and have another public hearing and ask you to delay it further to coincide with the January 1, 2016 date. And if you choose not to have an automatic repeal provision, which you certainly can do, after January 1 goes into effect with the preempt, and Senate Bill 454 goes into effect with the preemption clause, we will come back to you and ask you to repeal it. So those two additional motions are just to keep it from needing to come back to you. And I'm also going to ask you to, after the motion to put Senate Bill 5143 on the table, is to also amend it to add an immediate effective date to Council Bill 5143. Because without it, that ordinance won't go into effect till after July 1. So, and that was an oversight on our part. We would have included it, but we need to add that. So those are the four motions that we would walk through today.
So Claire's going to put motions on the table unless any of you have questions before that about the options in front of you.
So I think what I'm going to do is, based on the city attorney's recommendation, she gave me a copy of motions. I don't know that everyone got this. There's a motion to amend to push our effective date out to January 1st, and then a separate motion that would automatically repeal once the governor signs and we know it's not being referred to the ballot. So I'm going to start with the first motion I mentioned, and we can discuss it if we get a second. So I move to amend the ordinance to provide that the city's sick leave provisions become effective on January 1st, 2016, and that all references to October 1st, 2015 effective date in the ordinance be changed to January 1st, 2016.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. I need you to start with motion. I apologize. I wasn't clear about that. Okay. I need you to start with motion 1, which gets your Council Bill 5143 on the table.
I see.
Because we're going to be amending that.
Okay.
So, yeah, if we can go in order from motion 1 to...
Again.
No.
I move to adopt Council Bill 5143 regarding the city's sick leave ordinance.
Second.
Moved and seconded. So, any discussion on that? Okay. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. In opposition?
I have a question.
I'm sorry.
We just did that. It just said repeal.
Yeah.
What did it say? What does this mean?
Adopt.
We need to amend before we need to move to amend that motion that you put on the table. So we need to amend the ordinance.
If we vote for this, we're changing the effective date, right?
We're still on 1.
We're still on 1.
No, all this does is it brought the old motion back onto the table. So you actually haven't done anything different yet other than to bring it back. So now you can choose to amend or not.
And so this is the motion to put it on the table. The next one will be to amend.
Do we need to amend before we vote, though?
Yeah, there's still more to do.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
She said yes to bring it to the table.
Well, it's on...
It's on the table.
It's on the table. Now, somebody needs to
Can
move...
I move to amend the motion?
Yes.
Right.
So I will
Right.
move to amend that motion to amend the ordinance to add the following section. Section 5, pursuant to the provisions of Section 32 2 of the Eugene Charter of 2002, with the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members of the City Council, this ordinance shall become effective immediately upon adoption by the council and approval by the mayor or passage over the mayor's veto. An immediate effective date is necessary so that the July 1st, 2015 sick leave provisions effective date is amended prior to July 1st, 2015.
Now we need a second.
Second.
All right. Moved in, so the proposed amendment to the motion has been moved and seconded. Now we're ready to vote on the amended, nope.
Just want to make sure we clarify all the way through
I
what
know
people
what
are
you're
actually doing.
Right. So what this would do...
Oh, just for a second. Okay, let's just erase what we've done if it's not right, because Councilor Taylor still doesn't understand the sequence and what has to happen first and what it really means.
Okay. So what we want to do first is put Council Bill 5143 out for adoption, and that was the one that was in your packet on Monday.
And she did that.
She did that. And now, before that's adopted, we want to do, just like you would normally do, is move to amend it, and then vote individually on each of those amendments. So this first amendment that is on the table is to make Council Bill 5143 go into effect immediately.
That's what we understand.
And then if that is passed or not, there will be, if it's your option to do, if you want to put the next motion on the table, which would bump October 1 to January 1, you'll vote on that. And if the third and final motion would be to have the automatic repeal, you'll vote on that. And then, as amended, you'll vote on the whole thing.
And Councilor Taylor, just to remind you, the Council Bill 5143 is the proposal to postpone our implementation date to October 1st. So
We
that
didn't
was
vote on that yet.
correct. So if we go through these motions,
Okay, I want to be clear what I'm voting
Yeah.
for.
Yes.
And I'm not in favor of postponing.
Okay.
so-
Okay.
so now we have an amended motion. And should we vote on that before we vote on the other motions?
You're
or
going to
should we
vote on the
all of
amendment
them?
to add the immediate effective date.
Okay.
That's what you're going to vote on.
Then
right
that'll be added to the main motion.
Voting on
Gotcha.
this one. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Who's not?
Mike's not here.
Mike's not here. Okay. And one in opposition. So, all right. Then another motion.
I move to amend the ordinance to provide that the city's sick leave provisions become effective on January 1st, 2016, and that all references to an October 1st, 2015 effective date in the ordinance be changed to January 1st, 2016.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those, yes.
Gus, why do we want to do that? Why do we want to wait that long?
That would coincide with Senate Bill 454 that has a January 1 effective date. When the October 1 was added to the ordinance, to your Senate bill, to your council bill, that was before we knew the effective date that was going to be in the Senate bill. So that's the purpose of that.
So, and, I wanted to add to what the mayor and Councilor Zelenka said at the public hearing on Monday night that, as the champion of this bill, I'm not seeking to kill it, but we've accomplished our goal in having the state adopt a statewide sick leave law, which I don't think would have happened if Eugene hadn't passed our own local ordinance. So I agree with the mayor and Alan that this is really a victory on our part, and though it feels weird maybe to repeal our local ordinance, it's acknowledging that we now have a statewide ordinance in place. And I will note that as a local jurisdiction, we were unable to make this ordinance apply to the University of Oregon, to LCC, to many other local government jurisdictions, and with a statewide implementation, all of those other government entities will be covered by the state law. So we've actually, in some ways, increased the breadth of the benefit than we could have done on our own as a city. So that's why I'm going to be supporting this motion once it's all amended.
Alan?
Yeah, I just wanted to reemphasize that point and make it again, that without Eugene's action, I don't think anything would happen at the state. It would have probably circled around for a long time. The fact that Portland and Eugene both passed this, I think, pushed it over the top in the legislature. The fact that I would have preferred our version, which included everybody, all businesses, and started a little earlier. But this one starts January. The legislature's bill starts January and has paid sick leave if you're 10 or more employees. Ours was everybody. I got paid sick leave. Those that are 9 or less still get sick leave. It's just not paid, and you can't lose your job for not going to work and calling in sick or using it for the other purposes that we had. And I think the big plus for the state law is that it applies to the state government, which meant the U of O, and ODOT, and everybody else that's locally, and all the rest of the jurisdictions that are here, including the county and whatnot, that wouldn't have been included in our bill now are. I think the number of people that got paid sick leave shrunk, but then it expanded a little bit more. So I'm in favor. And then the big reason for coinciding our bill with the state bill is that we don't want businesses in our community to do two sets of rules. If we implemented ours and then they geared up and did all that really quickly, then they would have to change it to comply with the state law. It doesn't make sense. It's an administrative burden. Those people that are already doing this don't have to do anything. They're just already doing it. So it gives a little bit more time for businesses, and we don't have to do this implement one set of rules and then change and implement another set of rules. And then city doesn't have to do its implementation by two sets of rules either, and hire a BOLI as our contractor to implement and help us implement and enforce it. So that saves us about $30,000 to $50,000
Plus or minus.
Yeah, so all of that to me is a net positive. I mean, the downside is 6 more months before we get this implemented instead of July 1, which was the original intent, but I think it's a pretty fair trade-off.
And
we don't have a choice.
I would just add to that we're already getting lots of inquiries about what's the rules, so it's important that we do this, and I think it sends a good message. And frankly, I have not heard from, and I hear from all the advocates, and I have not heard anyone complain about us doing this. So just to put that out there too. Okay, ready to, yes.
I'm still concerned about the people who employ 9, who work for people who employ 9 or fewer people. And those may be the ones who are most in need of help. And I still didn't get an answer to my question. Suppose we know people who already are giving sick leave don't have to do anything, if it's at least as good as the state. Suppose ours was implemented. If employers wanted to give that much, they would not have to do anything. Is that correct?
I understand your question. If ours were implemented, which means an employer with 9 or less employees were providing paid sick leave, could they continue to do that? Yes.
So they aren't compelled to change the whole thing to comply
They
with
would
the
not
new
be
set of rules.
compelled. When the state implements theirs, they also could continue to. They could have paid sick leave for 9 or less employees as well.
It's not true that we would be making people change. It's only if they don't want to give paid sick leave. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I wanted to know. Then we're not compelling people to do it one time and then another time. They don't have to.
Well, I would say, there's probably more to this if we thought it out, but I would say that if we implement ours and start requiring all people to report, then you have a whole bunch of people gearing up to report that won't have to report once the state law goes into place. And so what you're really doing is putting a burden on people that, even though it's one I would like everybody to have, but nonetheless, there is a difference about who has to comply, and so this is to make it all the same. Okay, yes?
I was disappointed with the restriction of, not covering less than 10 employees, too. However, I feel that, that's sometimes how it goes, and the legislature can revisit that after a year and a half, and there will have been some time when it's been implemented all around the state, and they can take that up again and add those people and make it universal. Another point I think is significant is that, we got a lot of complaints from companies that were not based in Eugene about having to keep travel logs. They won't have to do that now. So they will have this extra thing they need to do, but one of the main complaints about keeping a complicated travel log, that goes out the window now because it applies to everyone no matter where your company's based. So that's another good thing. And we'll just have to be patient, and I think the others will be added. It's unfortunate there'd be that gap there, but sometimes that's just how legislation works. Make improvements later. Thank you.
Called sausage.
Yeah.
Yeah, one other little, what seems like a minor thing, but always ends up being a bigger thing is the way that payroll systems work. They're not as simple as one would think, where you can just click a button or change a number and everything just works. If someone implements our current law and then has to change it again, it's a significant effort probably to do that, and we avoid having businesses to change the way that they account for this in their payroll systems and doing it twice, in essence, by having the implementation date coincide with the state law.
Okay, I think we're ready.
I think we
Anybody
need to
else?
vote on
Yeah, so ready to vote on the motion?
the amendment. Yeah.
The amendment. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and none in opposition. It passes.
And our final amendment to this motion, I move to amend the ordinance to add the following section 6, ordinance number 20537 shall be automatically repealed on January 1st, 2016 in the event that the be engrossed version of SB 454 is signed into law by the governor and is not referred to the voters.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and none in opposition. It passes. Thank you.
Good, now we need to vote on
the
the main
amended.
motion. So I move to, so it would be Council Bill 5143 as amended? Okay. I move to adopt Council Bill 5143 regarding the sick leave city ordinance as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate. 7 in favor and none in opposition. It passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is a discussion on the library local option levy. City manager.
Something a little less confusing.
Yes.
So, yes, Renee and her team, and Connie.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting us back again. In January, Council asked us to prepare a comprehensive option to place a 5-year library levy measure on the November ballot. And the purpose of a library levy of this sort would be to enhance the current general fund support, enabling the city to invest in the library of the future, and to sustainably operate at the levels desired by the community. As we've envisioned library services of the future, we looked at trends in our community and in the country to prepare for current as well as anticipated needs. I'd like to start by reminding you of what the general fund currently supports, our current level of library services. Current services include 3 physical locations in 3 parts of the city. with access to technology at the libraries. And it also includes virtual services available 24/7 for those with technology to access them of their own. The current off-site service level is rather limited. It delivers to those who face particular barriers to library access. For example, our Storytime to Go program sends trained volunteers to bring story times to groups such as low-income children in daycares. In April, the city engaged SRI to test support for a potential library levy, as well as to reconfirm the community priorities regarding the services desired. This is partly in response to the questions raised by Council in January and concerns about communities' interest and willingness for a levy of this nature. And so I would like to now turn this presentation over to Dr. Gary Manros of SRI, who will be providing you with the information from a recent survey he conducted about library services in Eugene.
Madam Mayor and City Council members, very good seeing you again. The first thing I should probably mention is the research design and methodology. We surveyed 405 high and moderate propensity voters. That gives you a accuracy level of plus or minus 4 to 5%. The data were gathered from April 15th to April 26th. Again, it was limited to high and moderate propensity voters. And the one very unique characteristic of this study is that we also identified your subset of opinion leaders. That's 13.5% of your electorate who are opinion leaders, and it's a follow the leader game. The other thing I should probably mention, and you've heard me say this before, there are two predictors of behavior at the polls, of voter behavior, decision making. The first one are core values, the collective core values of your electorate. And the second one has to do with expectations. And when you're talking a funding measure, expectations means threshold of willingness to pay. So it gets down to any other purchase decision value. Could I have the first slide? Okay, we looked at some attitudes, which are critical. And the first question is, how satisfied are you with the existing public library in Eugene? And you can see you have over 3/4 that are satisfied, and interesting enough, half, 48%, nearly half, are extremely satisfied. So obviously your public library is doing an excellent job, and that would also, I would argue, be evidenced by the fact, if you look at history, your constituents have consistently supported the public library. Next slide. So one of the questions we wanted to know is, should we invest in existing library facilities, or should the city add one or more new branches? And you can see here 56% said, and this, by the way, has a lot to do with the economy and the recovering economy. And so what your voters are telling you is, yes, let's focus on our existing libraries, enhance those, improve those, but not necessarily spend more to open more facilities. Next slide. Now this becomes important because here we're talking about how to spend the money. You're spending priorities. And as you can see, now this particular slide, there's one thing I want to point out. It's not consistent with regards to the top priority and second priority. For example, if you look right here, expand public outreach, and I'll define that in a moment, that actually goes down lower. But if you aggregate top priority and second priority, that's your rank ordering. The number one is to promote early literacy, and I'll mention succeed in school. This is really important because your electorate is saying, you know what, it's all about our youth, and it's all about, frankly, age. It's not specific, it's across the board. Any way we can promote literacy and improve success in schools, that's a very good thing. Now, expand public outreach, I want to define that for you. That was expand a public outreach program that takes library services into the community. For example, to preschool, K-12 schools, Head Start, nursing, homes, and churches. So that isn't public outreach to promote. That's taking those services out into the community for those people who can't come into the existing libraries. And then programs and services for career development. That's a good example of why this isn't age specific. It's across the board. So anything that's going to help your constituents advance their careers, and do better. And then extremely important here is equity, and you can see that 50, that really goes up above. One of the things that I've noticed consistently through the years in Eugene is equity is a serious issue here. Treat everybody the same and give everybody an equal opportunity. Next slide. So this is interesting because this is linear, and it does, you see, top priority and total is consistent. So increase hours of operation, those are the first two, and then the next one is add new services to the existing libraries. Your constituents want access to your public libraries. That's what those hours are about. And then second is add new services. You can see the opening full service manned branches is a lower priority, as is a kiosk. Next slide, please. Okay, so our benchmark, what kind of voter support before we actually look at threshold of willingness to pay for those particular services? You have a total of 56.5% likely support. Now, I need to explain that. We ask, is that if it's a yes, or if it's a no, is it a definite yes, a definite no? Is it a probably yes, probably no, or undecided? And so you can see your potential is 70%, but in reality, we've through the years found this to be very consistent. So you have 55.5% likely voter support. Equally important, when you look down here at the opinion leaders, we always look to see which side of the equation they're on. And in this case, it's 62.5% versus 56.5%. So what that means is your mainstream voter will, when they say, before I actually decide how to vote, I'm going to call somebody I trust or talk to somebody I trust. And the likelihood of success of saying, yeah, it's important is very good. Next slide. Now we get into the threshold of willingness to pay. Now, we tested $5 a month, 4 and 3. At $5, you see you have 52.5%, and down here, 56.5% of opinion leaders. But you only have 40% of your definite, and so at the end of the day, we're not going to recommend $5. We think that exceeds the threshold. The next slide. At $4 a month, that is, and this is before we tested, as you can imagine, and as you know we always do, arguments for and against this initiative. Potential is 2/3. Opinion leaders is still well above significantly. By the way, it might be nice to know 3% is what's significant statistically. So if it's less than 3%, it's not significant, but it's way above 3. So you have 56% likely support for $4 a month. Next slide, please. And 62.5% for $3 a month. So you can see your constituents are price sensitive, and as the price goes down, the support goes up. So the question at the end of the day is, how much insurance do you want to put into this plan? Should you move it forward? Next slide. So this is really important because the next slide I'll show you after the arguments are heard for and against this notion. You have 54% voter support and you're 62 in opinion leaders. So the pattern is consistent. But if after the argument's 54%, this really screams, be very careful about price sensitivity. Therefore, we have some specific recommendations. They are in one. It's a go, but that assumes a couple of things. Please. That depends first on the amount of insurance you want. Could I have the next slide? And that you carefully structure that ballot language. Approximately, historically, it's been known that and proven that 75% of your voters read basically the ballot they get in the mail. And they decide to vote. And what drives that vote are your core values and then your expectations, your threshold of willingness to pay. So you really need to structure that ballot language carefully. And I have to tell you, I work in a lot of states, and your state legislature has made it very complicated in terms of how you write ballot language. And so they're very specific and much tougher than in most states. And therefore, you really have to structure that ballot language carefully. And then second, you need a well-thought-out and hard-hitting public outreach effort that adheres strictly to the findings from the voter survey. And what I mean by that, I mean that's critical. you have a very sophisticated electorate, which I'm not giving you anything you don't know. But in Oregon, you have particularly high propensity voters. They're even more thoughtful than they are in most states. They pay attention. They really analyze things. All you had to do is yesterday's registered guard read some of the feedback from people who your letters to the editor are actually it's electronic. But the point is, you have a very thoughtful electorate. What that means is they're going to make an informed decision. So if you don't inform them of the need, and more importantly, how you're going to spend the money, because they're already there with the need, it's a question of how you're going to spend the money and their threshold, the willingness to pay. You must get that message across to them. If you do that, it's a go. Then the last question here is, well, should it be $3 a month or $4 a month? And that just depends on what you want, and that's $48 a year versus $36 a year, and that depends on how much insurance you want to build into it. Next slide. So this is really, this next slide speaks to voting propensity, but why do we do that? And the answer is, you want to know, do you want a high turnout election or a lower turnout election? And there's more than this that goes into your decision, obviously. But if you just limit it to these particular data, this would argue you would want to go to a lower turnout. But that said, that may not be necessary in this case, because if you look at the threshold here for moderate propensity voters, the truth of the matter is you're still above, before and after, you're still above your requisite vote, simple majority vote. So if you were to decide we wanted to go on a higher turnout, i.e. a November election versus a May or June election, then that is an option. So this isn't a deal breaker. Next slide. So I do want to share with you the positive arguments of impact. Next slide, please. Now, this is important to understand, because when you look at most of your research, what you see is these numbers are usually in the 20s to 40s. And the reason for that, they look, most polling firms take a look at, okay, if you heard this argument, would it make you more or less likely to support, to vote yes or no? And then they subtract the two. More likely to vote yes, more likely to vote no. They subtract the two, and they say that's your shift. Well, that's naive. It doesn't work that way. What we do, that's called gross shift, and we do look at that. But net shift, they ought to be done in this 3. The truth is, typically, you're not going to shift more than 4%. So if these are much higher than 4, you have to question the credibility. What this is if you go from probable yes to a yes at the polls, it's still a yes, right? You go probable no to a no, it's still a no. So what we're looking at is, does it shift from a yes to a no or a no to a yes? That's called net shift. So in this case, your most compelling argument is with additional funding, the library will be able to purchase additional books and materials, as well as success to a wider range of resources, and there will be there will be a shorter wait time for bestsellers and what have you. So that's what your electorate wants. All right, so you really look at that, and that net shift of 3.2% is huge. So you need to focus on it. Now, you look at the second one, even though it's below the dotted line, the funding will be used to restore the library services to previous levels before all the budget crisis, and that's significant, 2.3, that's huge. So if you you go down to the third one, you'll be able to use and purchase additional tools and equipment that could be shared by the community members who might not otherwise be able to access these resources. Now, that has to do with equity, doesn't it? That has to do with that digital divide and equity. You have an electorate with a social conscience is what it gets down to. And a good example of that, one of the issues in Eugene always has been, is homeless. I mean, you have an electorate with a social conscience, and you can see it right here, and it's very consistent. So that message strategy is critical. Next slide. So if you have any questions, I'll happily answer them, or we'll wait for later.
Yeah. Thank you very much. George?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mr. Manros, for the presentation.
Pleasure.
My first question is, how much did we pay for this survey? I always like to know.
You know, I already paid, what was it, 20?
You don't have to answer it right now, but I would like an answer to that.
Yeah, we get to the exact amount.
Curious. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last question. What was it, George?
How much we paid for the survey, and we'll send that back out to you with
how much the city pay. One of the earlier slides there was a, let's see, I'm looking at page 7 or 6. And down in the lower right-hand corner, there's this little box about the neighborhood leaders or community leaders. And there's percentages and there's letters in front. Does that refer to the part of town?
Yes, that is your geographic breakdown.
Okay.
It's not opinion leaders per se. It's your electorate at large geographic breakouts.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you. And then, is there any estimate for the public outreach that we would spend that you recommended?
I think Connie will present kind of the options that would be included in it.
Okay.
Where we could either take messages or questions for Dr. Manross now or wait till the end after Connie has an opportunity, but
Okay.
it might be the
Good idea.
best way.
All right, sure. I think my other questions would fall in that second category, so I think I'm done for now.
Okay. Thank you. Well, as
Can I just ask one question before you begin? So Betty, is your question, can that wait for this after the second piece, or is there something you wanted to ask now that is specific to the material that was just asked?
Has to do with the material, really.
Because what she's going to go into is how this plays out, and she'll give you lots of
No,
information.
I want to know about the survey.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Who were the opinion leaders? How did you find them?
Okay. That actually is a very astute question. The model comes out of the most studied phenomenon in behavioral sciences called diffusion of innovations. And it's well known, the model is very clear, that of 100% of any population, 2.5% are innovators, 13.5% are opinion leaders, 34% are early adopters, and early majority, late majority, and laggards. That 13.5% since 1948, in all honesty, the academic community has been trying to figure that out, the very question you ask. How do you identify them? Because they know it's 13.5%, and after a voting decision or a purchase decision, it always turns that out. But in theory, then, you could take that profile. There's a profile of people. For example, they are information seekers. They will make informed decisions. They, frankly, don't like taxes, but they're willing to pay them if there's value. But there's these characteristics. And when you actually do that research, historically, that number has come out between 48 and 52%. Well, there's an algorithm, and I actually created it, but who worked with me on it was Dr. Everett Rogers. He is the father of diffusion theory, the most prominent scholar worldwide in the field. And he is co-authoring the paper that goes to Harvard Business Review. Now, the equation is an algorithm, and I'll candor, I'm not going to share it. There's only 2 people on earth that know it, myself and one of my employees, and that just isn't going to be shared. But how we do it is we have this algorithm, and we ask 8 questions, which is in your survey. You can see what they are. We ask these 8 questions, and that profiles your electorate, those who we've surveyed, and then we apply the algorithm, and that pulls out, and the first thing we look at is that between 13 and 15%. In this case, I think it was 14% to be exact. So we've probably got some of the innovators in there, but they are the opinion leaders.
That doesn't tell me how you decided who's an opinion
I just did.
maker.
There are answers to the 8 questions.
The answers to the 8 questions, correct.
And
But then it has to be
that tells
applied.
you that they are, the way they answer those questions tells you that they're opinion leaders.
Yeah, they are information seekers. They have a certain attitude about credit. They want to make informed decisions, in fact, and they're willing to, by the way, they're willing to take a greater risk because it's an informed decision. But there's 8 questions.
So they are anonymous. You don't know who they are.
Well, they're not anonymous, but I mean, like, I wouldn't share. What we know is that subset is the opinion leader, and then we look at where they stand on the
Do
question.
they know that you know who they are?
No, they do not.
They're not by name, because as
That's
what
right.
I understand is when
That's
you're
correct.
surveying and you survey this 400 and
Yeah.
some odd people,
Yeah.
some people fit this profile, which then
Some
don't
don't.
translate.
Okay. I was thinking most people, if they were known, many people would say they're for something that they won't really vote for. That's all I was thinking.
You know,
Thank you.
you're bringing up, I need to answer one more question. You didn't quite ask, but you sort of did. They're not influentials. there's a difference between an opinion leader and an influential. An influential, city council, your influentials, they're high profile. An opinion leader, the best example I can give you is I have an IT person on my staff. I trust him. He's wonderful. But when I have this horrible problem, and it comes up from time to time, who do I call? I call Jim Tellerico at the East Bay Regional Park District, he's my guru. Now, I can tell you he doesn't see himself as an opinion leader. He's my guy. And so that's the kind of opinion leaders usually don't know they're opinion leaders. Influentials certainly know they are. It's a difference.
Okay, I think we're ready now.
Okay. Well, as you've heard, Dr. Manross's survey confirmed what we'd heard from you, what we'd heard from the Library Advisory Board, our partners, including the Friends of the Library, Eugene Public Library Foundation, previous patron surveys, the focus groups on the Library of the Future that we did last fall, and best opinion about professional directions of libraries. And based on these results, we have crafted two options to present to you. They are based on the $3 per month per typical household and the $4 per month typical household that Dr. Manross identified as within the threshold of willingness to pay for these services. The biggest difference between what you'll see now and what you saw last January is that we paid attention to what the community told us about not wanting to use temporary levy funding to invest in new branches that might not be sustainable, and instead to focus on increasing access to the services we already have and to leverage those to meet these highest values of our community, promoting early literacy, supporting success in school and work, and ensuring equity of access for everyone. So first, levy option number 3 at approximately $3 per month. This would, first of all, add hours at both branches. We hear often and loudly that reduced hours at Bethel and Sheldon branches, as well as the Sunday hours downtown, are not working for community members. The levy option 1 would add 22 hours at each branch, leading to a total of 48 hours at the branches across 6 days instead of the current 5 days. It would also add 3 hours to downtown on Sunday mornings. And we've heard, especially from parents of young children, which is obviously a key group for increasing early literacy, and for seniors, that Sunday mornings are a crucial time for them. After careful analysis, we believe that these 48 hours at the branches, 6 days, and 3 hours Sunday morning downtown would meet these needs. We would also be adding $300,000 to the library's materials budget to purchase new books and other resources. And this speaks specifically to that most persuasive of arguments that Dr. Manross tested, shorter wait times for the most popular items. We would also be bringing community services, library services out to the community in places where people are already gathered, such as schools, community centers, businesses, senior living, low-income housing, child care centers. These are people that either do not have the time or the transportation ability to get to the places that we're currently offering services, and so it addresses directly the equity issue and access to services that Eugenians value so much. It also would allow us to focus on underserved members of our community and tailor programs specifically to them. For example, a program in Spanish at a location where people are most comfortable. Makerspace is the other part of the outreach, and this is something we're already investing in, where we're purchasing tools that are too expensive for any one individual to provide for themselves, but that the community can share to build those skills that are needed for the workplace of the future. An example of something like this would be high-end video equipment, editing equipment, or a 3D printer. The library has already invested in somewhat in this technology in collaboration with a number of community partners such as RAIN. Levy option 1 would also add more workshops and events. Currently, at the library every week, there are a number of free programs for young children, teens, and adults, and we know that this is highly valued, and there is a need and desire for more of these, particularly the early literacy preparation. And with Levy funds, we could provide additional workshops, and events with teens in particular as a priority. We know that's an underserved group for us, as well as workshops geared for career and business development. The final point for Levy Option 1 is increasing technology at the branches. Providing internet access is a really critical role for libraries these days because so many people do not have access to it, and it's one of the most important ways for modern citizens to get access to information. We could double our internet access at the branches by adding a vend unit that would loan tablets and laptops for in-library use, not for taking home. And these vend units are very cost-effective. They are self-service. People check out the item with their library card. They use it in the library for 2 hours, and when they put it back in the slot, it wipes clean their information so there's no identity theft issues, and it also recharges the laptop so it's prepared for the next person to borrow. It would be a very cost-effective way for us to double internet access in the neighborhoods. So to sum up, Levy Option 1 would add hours, materials, off-site programs, additional workshops and events in the libraries, and increased access to technology at the branches. And this is aimed for the $3 per month for a typical household, $33 to $37 a year. It would raise $2.5 to $2.7 million in addition to the current general fund support. Going into Levy Option 2, this is the level at approximately $4 per month. It would include everything I've mentioned in Levy Option 1, plus the following. Even more hours at Bethel and Sheldon branches. We would add 4 hours on Sunday afternoons. This would allow both branches to be open every day of the week, 7 days of the week. And one thing that we're asked for very frequently is 24/7 access to the materials returns at the branches. This would allow us to do that. It would also add 5 more hours to the downtown library. These would be added on weekdays from 9 to 10 in the morning. Believe me, that is prime time for the preschool crowd, and that would allow us to increase those early literacy programs. We would also be bringing additional off-site programs of library experts, makerspace, early literacy programs out into the community. Again, as I described, it's just additional ability to do additional number of those. And finally, it would allow us to add a vend unit at the downtown library, similar to what I described for the branches, so that we could significantly increase access using our existing Wi-Fi to users across the entire library system. Summary of Levy Option 2 adds even more hours, additional expansion of off-site programs, and increases technology across the entire system. A cost would be approximately $4 per month for a typical household, $45 to $49 per year, raising $3.5 to $3.7 million to supplement the current general fund support of the library. Next steps, we have reserved a tentative slot on July 13th if the council wishes for us to continue pursuing, getting a more detailed outline of exactly what a potential voter would be paying for. And depending on today's discussion, then we would need action not later than July 29th in order to place something on November's ballot.
So what I would like to do, and you can certainly say pass if you don't have anything you want to ask, but I just sort of like to go around the table. I think one of the questions is, do you want to move forward? Which of these are you more inclined to support? Those are the kinds of answers they're going to be looking for today. So I'm going to start with you, Greg.
Well, I think that I've, talked about this before. I'm more inclined to support option one. I think that we need to bolster our libraries, particularly the branch libraries. We need more access. We are having a continual growth, unfortunately, in the level of poverty in this community. And in order to reverse that, I think that the libraries are a critical piece in that puzzle. We have to be able to provide access for our youth, particularly those who are underrepresented, and our seniors who are increasingly dependent upon both the library and the library for access to email, computer access, all of that across platforms. And so now we've evolved in this society to a point where computers and the internet access is virtually a utility, and many people's way to access that utility is through the library system. And I think that we have a unique opportunity to get some hours back, to perhaps, in some context, grow our capacity in the library system. And so I think that we need to move affirmatively forward with that. Put a solid proposal together that is very clear for the voters so they understand what they're going to be getting and have the opportunity to either vote it up or vote it down. But I think that there, as Mr. Manross said, articulated very well in his report, I think that there is solid support for us to, create more access to the library system. And to do that is to, bolster our downtown library, as well as, making sure that we put on a solid footing our branch libraries.
Betty?
Thank you. First, I want to know what is a typical household when you say how much it would cost. What level of? Is that a $200,000 home or a $300,000?
So the typical home is determined by Lane County Assessment and Taxation, and for the current year, that home would have a market value of about $238,000 and an assessed value of about $184,000.
Thank you.
Say that again.
That's helpful.
238 and 184.
Comment. I would not talk about how much per month. That's not how we pay our taxes or how we get our tax bill. I think per year is better, and it doesn't sound as if you're trying to fool somebody. You could say $3. That sounds, that's not bad. But as for equity, I don't really call it equity when some parts of town don't have branch libraries and some parts do. I would prefer that we would be looking to have branches in every corner of the city, but that's not what we're doing right now. And I guess that's, you're talking about November already. I was going to say a high turnout is much better, I think, because if you have a low turnout election, the people who hate taxes will show up for sure, and other people might not, thinking that everything's going to be okay. Of the two, I would prefer, I don't know, I'm neutral on which of these we should do, really.
George?
Thanks, Mayor. How long would the levy last?
5 years.
5 years? Okay, I missed that somehow. 5 years, thank you. My preferred way, and I love the library. I'm there almost every day, and I'm downtown almost every day. It's the Novella Cafe in front is one of my floating offices around town. So, and I absolutely adore the library. But my preferred strategy would be to try to do this through the budget process next year, at least, because I've got a feeling that it'll be like this year, revenues will increase. Do we have any, is it too early to make any kind of revenue forecast at all?
It is. So much of that revenue data, particularly property tax, doesn't come in until November, so we really won't know until end of this year at the earliest.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they're relatively small amounts, certainly for everyone in this room. For other people, that may not be the case. However, I think this would be a really useful piece for everybody to know, the electors and the council. And on page 13, figure 5, there's a section, and it's in very small print. It shows up much better on the screen. There's a piece that says 1990s bonds will be retired soon. And I think that would be a great piece of information to know which ones, how much are they for, on the tax bill, how it shows up on the tax bill, and when they'll retire.
Yeah, we'll provide that as a separate
Because then people
information.
will go, oh, well, they want to increase my taxes $45 a year, but hey, this one's going away next year or the year after. And that would, a lot of people would go, oh, no problem, I can handle it. I think it'd be beneficial for I will certainly support putting it on the ballot. There's no question about that. But I think that would be a really useful piece of information to know. And I think, I know, one of my other questions was, is there any estimate for how much public outreach, how much money will be spent on public outreach? Or is that too early even? It was a piece in the survey.
Typically, the city provides informational outreach, sometimes a simple factual flyer.
I think he's referring to the actual programming
the outreach
part.
portion of the program, or the outreach around
Of
the
the
ballot
program.
measure?
Yeah,
the program.
Or no, I mean the ballot measure.
Ballot measure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So typically a lot of that is paid for by a public action committee,
Okay.
a PAC
I was
formed.
thinking maybe Friends of the Library or
Exactly.
other people like that. Okay. Well, thanks. That answers all my questions.
Rich Polling?
Yeah, first of all, I got a couple of questions on the presentation on option 1. You mentioned $300,000 for materials budget and also increasing access to technology. I believe it was a VIN unit. Is this $300,000 and also the additional access to technology, is this reoccurring on an annual basis with this levy, or is it a one-time spending over the 5-year period?
The $300,000 would be an annual. Every year, it's basically returning what was some of the reductions that were made in the past 6 years around the library's materials budget. In terms of the vend unit, it's a one-time cost to purchase it, but you have to build in replacement for the things that are being loaned. So like the laptops and iPads would be on probably a 3-year cycle. So there is some ongoing maintenance to that, but the initial cost of that one is upfront.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Friends of the Library that have worked on this over the months since our last Budget Committee discussion. I think one of the biggest mistakes that the Budget Committee made years ago was taking the library and putting it back into the general funds, because ever since that time, we've had nothing but problems. Once it was taken off the operating levy, we've had problems trying to maintain our services. What we're doing is, we at the council table here, we're not deciding how much money. It's going to be up to the voters. All we're doing is giving the voters the opportunity to say yes or no. If they say yes, we see these increases. If they say no, you get what you pay for. In some of the outreach, in addition to what George was saying about the information about the expiring bonds, I think it's very necessary to make it extremely clear the list between general fund, the list where the money is being spent, the general fund's money, and the levy money. A lot of the people in the community don't understand governmental budgeting. There's certain times you can use money for X but not Y, and people don't understand that. They see a pocket full of money that the city can spend. Why aren't we spending it over here? So that is something I think that we need to be really clear on. The two different types of money, and also exactly what the levy money is being spent for. I think that's extremely critical. And whether it's $3 a month or $36 a year, I think most of us can figure out if it's going to be, costing us X amount of money, what the annual cost is going to be to an increase. I think by breaking it down to a monthly basis, most people operate their family budgets on a monthly cycle anyway, and if you're putting money aside to pay your property taxes at the end of the year, you need to start doing that ahead of time. So I think listing it, $3 a month or $36 a year, I mean, it's simple to add both of the wordings in on that. And I think that's all I had to say.
May I make one comment on your last point? The way I'm not trying to play attorney here, your legal counsel needs to weigh in, but the way it works legally is you have to explain that clearly in your ballot language so they would know it's X dollars a year, and then you have the choice of breaking it down to a month or not. But you certainly have to be clear on how much that is.
Okay.
Chris?
Thank you. Having been involved in the budget process for the last 4 or 5 years, it's really clear to me that the library for the community represents more than just a budget item or just an operational item. It really is an indicator topic for how people feel the city reflects their interests and responds to them in the community. And so from that standpoint, I think the library assumes a little greater prominence in terms of what the city should do and what the library should do and how we should serve the community. So I'm very supportive of the idea of finding ways to be more productive, have more outreach, be more full in what we can do with the library. I realize over the last several years we've had to make cuts at the library that we didn't want to do, and the public responded, but I want to try to restore those services and even enhance them to what degree we can in a prudent way. So I come back to the notion of prudence, and that for me is, I think, option one. I draw parallels between what we're proposing to do here and what we did with the road bond. We didn't choose to go for the maximum amount. We didn't choose to go for the maximum term. And I think the reason was we wanted to demonstrate to the public that we could make a promise, we could fulfill it, and then at the end of the day have met our commitment. And I think we should do the same thing here. We should say we're not going to ask for the maximum amount of money we could have asked for. We're not going to ask for the longest term we possibly could go for. We're going to demonstrate to you that we're going to use this money the way we say we're going to use it, and we're going to use it prudently, we're going to use it effectively, and at the end of the day you will get value for your $36 or your $3 a month or whatever it comes out to. And I think in that way you keep faith with the public. You can give them what they want, but you can give it to them in a way that they feel you've been accountable, responsible, and prudent in what you've done. So that's why I think I support option one. I think it sends a good signal that we care, but we're not trying to solve all the problems, which raises my last point. On your slide where it says the general fund, and this was kind of carrying on with George's point, the general fund still supports the library to a great degree. So by passing this serial levy, this doesn't solve the library's operating need. It doesn't completely cover it. This covers a part of it, and the city's general fund covers a part of it. And what I would be curious to know is what proportion overall of the city's obligation to the library this serial levy would represent. Is it 20%? Is it 25%? Is it 30%? In terms of the overall cost of operating the library, this levy would absolutely help, and it would help in a very critical way. But the public needs to know it's not the total amount, and it's not an insignificant amount. It's what percent of the total amount we need to make sure this important resource carries forward.
And I would say the library service has been resized to fit within the city budget. A no vote on this potential levy would not cost anything. They would not lose anything. The city is committed to this what you've seen in the FY16 proposal is going forward with exactly what I showed as current library service with no levy. So the levy option 1, it would add, what was it, about 2.5 to 2.7. I think the general fund support of the library is about a little over 10 million right now. So that would
In the neighborhood of
yeah.
25%,
Yeah.
let's say.
Actually, more like 20 because
20, okay.
because it would increase the total.
Well, that's helpful for me because I think people need to know that this serial levy, as important as it is, represents 20% of what it costs to run the entire library system. And whilst we wouldn't be crippled if it didn't pass and the library wouldn't end, it can definitely do a lot of good providing support for that very important system.
Need another round?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go over.
Yeah, thanks. I think the first thing I'd like to make perfectly clear is that the reason we're talking about this and the reason we've been talking about parks maintenance dollars and the lowering of the hours and the materials budget and the closing of branches, along with the lower parks maintenance and all the other cuts that we made that made up to $2 million is a direct result of budget cuts because the service fee was turned down by the voters. So if you think, or as the recent editorial in the Register Guard said, that nothing happened because we turned down the service fee, that's just incorrect. We're here because that fee went down. So it may not have affected you personally, but it sure had an impact on others and it eliminated services. So the changes did happen pretty much as we said, except for the PERS reform, which was recently overturned by the courts, and we're actually going to see that come back to us probably worse than the original part when we got the news. So all those things did happen, and I think one of the reasons the service fee failed was some people didn't trust that the money that we were going to collect was going to go for the services that we said it was going to go for. How do we assure folks that in this case, these are the specific things we're going to buy and only these things are the things that we're going to buy?
Can I take that?
I think when we set up the accountability, transparency piece of the levy, we will use our library advisory board as the review board for doing what we said. So we'll have citizens looking at what we say we're going to do and whether we're doing it and do regular reporting back, not unlike what we do for the street maintenance.
Are there any legal restrictions on a levy that say we said we're going to spend it on these 5 things and these are the only things?
I could let Sue maybe answer that, but typically we follow what's in the ballot language. I mean, you're restricted by what the ballot language says you can use it for. That's
Right.
the simple answer.
Right, I think that's the short answer. And we also are required by state law to account for the levy funds in a separate fund that gets reported in our budget and in our financial reports so people can see that separate. So you wouldn't just see library as a whole, you would actually see the levy piece and see how those dollars were spent.
And with a direct line to what programs they funded?
No, but
That it would be spent on the library?
Let me make a comment on it, because beyond that, Councilman Pryor's point, that gets to it. If you, instead of put it for 5 years, for example, put it for 3 years, brought it back to the electorate, you're demonstrating accountability, and you either do or you don't. So there's a legal component, but there's also a reality component that says, look, we're going to demonstrate trust.
I might add that, as was pointed out in January, the library does have a track record of doing this, of handling 3 previous levies.
Yeah, I think we need to work on that part. We saw a drop-off in option 2 over option 1, Dr. Manross. I think it was like 6.5%. That dropped off in terms of,
That's
is
correct.
that a big difference, and is that the right way to look at it?
That is the correct way to look at it. You want to look at that drop-off. The word I like to use is insurance. How much insurance do you want? But you do have a trust factor going into it. It's also another point here that is consistent with your question is the more specific you are on how the money is going to be spent, the more voter support you're going to get. And then it gets back to, and you have something here. Remember, it was 75%, I believe, of your constituents really do trust the library and the staff and the city council and your city manager, how you're spending that money. So coming back to your point, if you can demonstrate and tell them straight up front, this is what we're going to do, and we're not asking for all of it, we're not, and then we will come back and be accountable. It's a lot easier, I shouldn't use that term, I suppose, to renew an existing tax or fee than it is to create a new one. So the fact that it was allowed to drop off, now you have a new tax. So your strategy is a good one.
Yeah, I think the library is an essential service on par with police and fire, and deserves its support. And we do a great job, as the surveys have said, and I think people will respond to that. Maybe we should look at putting specific language in the ballot measure about what it's going to go for. That might add to it. Did you look at level of income in your survey, and does that relate to support?
We do have that intelligence, and I can look at that. And I did look at it, but I just didn't bring the table. But I can tell you, in this case, it's interesting because your higher SES actually supports it more, and there's several reasons for that. But the bottom line is they appreciate. You have, I mentioned it earlier, you have a unique electorate in a sense that your high propensity voters are extremely information seekers. They make informed decisions, and those folks care about all of the issues. In fact, you look at the discussion today, it absolutely mirrors the findings in this report, doesn't it? So your high propensity voters would be more inclined to support a library tax, for example, than they would other things, other than, and you're right, it's public safety and library in that order. So yes, your high propensity, higher income actually has higher support.
And then why did the support drop off in a November election versus a midterm? And was it significant?
Well, that is conventional wisdom says, and one of your city council mentioned it today, conventional wisdom says you get stronger support for a tax with a higher turnout. That has not proven to be true through the years, which is why we break down and look at support with high propensity, moderate propensity, and low propensity voters, because low propensity voters don't vote. So if you look at it as the whole, then you're going to make a bad prediction. So you really want to look at support with your high moderate propensity voters. Now, if you have greater support in your high propensity voters, then you want a low turnout, right? And if you have, because it's a higher ratio of the actual outcome. And on the other hand, and it often happens, if you have greater support in your moderate or lower propensity voters, now you're going to want a higher turnout. But in this case, if you recall, it turns out you're above threshold both with high and moderate propensity voters. So normally I would have been saying, gosh, go to a low propensity turnout, but lower turnout. But in this case, there'll be a difference in the actual outcome, but both should pass threshold.
Can you talk a little bit about the Friends of Library and what they're planning to do on the campaign and the outreach that they're going to do? A little bit more detail, if you know anything more. Because that's going to take a significant effort.
Yeah. They're thinking about that. They've been involved in the 3 levy campaigns before. So they have some experience and track record. We've been getting some advice from national level library PAC about how to effectively inform voters about issues like this. But they aren't going to actually form a PAC until the council takes action and puts something on a ballot, which is a legal limitation. And so, and at that point, I'm left, as a city employee, I'm less involved in that because I cannot.
I speak to that. There are 2 factors there that are critical. One, and again, I'm not trying to play attorney, but I've done enough of this for 30 years. I know how it works. Legally, you are, as government officials, you are obliged to tell your constituents what you want to do, why you want to do it, what it's going to cost. What you can't do is say vote yes, and by the way, you can't say vote no. You can as an individual, but you can't as a city council. And city employees, of course, are vulnerable. They really need to back off of that. But that said, you will, hopefully, you are obliged at least to answer those questions and to give your voters an informed, the information you need to make an informed decision. That the difference between that and your friends of the library or any third-party group, they can say vote yes and will. So what you hope for is that they will actually take advantage of the intelligence that you have spent tax dollars to gather, this benchmark survey, and that their message strategy is consistent with the collective desires, core values, and expectations of your voters. And once in a while, and I've seen it happen, they'll go out and go out and do their own thing and get their own message strategy, and it blows up. You really want to put a mirror up to your voters, which you've done, and then. And it's like any other purchase decision, because the tax is a purchase. At the end of the day, you write the check. So if you are giving your constituents what they want for the price they're willing to pay, they will vote yes. You don't have to ask them to. But the external organization is key to this, because they can say vote yes. You can't.
Right. And I lean towards option one. I haven't decided yet, but my message to the Friends of the Library is, please let us know what you plan to do, because that's very critical in our decision to put it on the ballot. And that kind of organized campaign and support is critical.
Right.
Claire?
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the survey results and the presentation, and I also appreciate Councilor Zelenko's comments pointing out that the failure of the city service fee did actually result in cuts and reductions in services. And in the aftermath of that, I think it's important to note that the Library Foundation and others came to Council and asked us to consider bringing this levy forward as a strategy for bringing our services back up to where they had been prior to those necessary cuts. So I'm definitely in favor and think we should take a levy to the voters. I haven't settled on exactly which option yet. I could probably be persuaded to support either of the two options that have been put before us. I think we don't have a lot of other options to raise local revenue, and this would be a targeted levy that voters can be confident will support library services. Just like our parks, the community places high value on quality library services, and I especially appreciate the list of specific items that the staff has identified that these funds would be used for. I think, as others have noted, it's important to demonstrate to voters exactly what we hope to accomplish if we pass this levy. And we know our staff is providing excellent programming, is very responsive to community needs, and leverages community partnerships like RAIN, which was mentioned, that further enhances our services. Today's Register Guard editorial, I thought, had some wise caution about, using this levy if we can't ensure that we will follow through on the commitment to keep services at a certain level if we find ourselves in a budget crunch. But, I was on the budget committee for a number of years prior to coming on council, and based on prior experience, I think the council and the city manager have demonstrated that they know how to keep faith with the voters when it comes to the past library levy that was in place. And the council kept the library whole even when other services were facing reductions. And the council fulfilled a promise to let that levy expire when they did. Now, at the time, we didn't know that the Great Recession was barreling down towards us at that moment. So the timing was not great, but nobody was able to predict that. So, I think we have a track record with the library levies of actually following through on what voters expected of them, city staff and city council following through on the commitments to use those wisely and as promised. So I just have a couple of questions. I think Councilor Brown might have asked one of mine, which was, I would like to know if we have an estimate of how much the average taxpayer is going to see their property tax reduced when those bond retirement that was mentioned in the survey actually happens. If we put this on the November ballot and it passed, when would it go into effect in terms of it starting on the tax rolls?
That would be July 1st, 2016.
And then my last question had to do with the survey results. The slide with the information on voting propensity seemed to show that support decreased after they heard arguments in favor and against, and I'm wondering if that's something we should be concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's one of the reasons I'm going to make actually another proposal or recommendation. But yes, that did go down. That's the bad news. The good news is it didn't go down below threshold. And remember, the model, the go-no-go model, is a conservative model by design. So with a conservative model, it still did not go below threshold. But that said, it's if you look around the state, which I'm sure you all have, tax measures haven't done well, right? And that's for two reasons. One reason is that certain counties, Lane being one of them, sort of got spoiled because of the federal timber and all that good stuff, and now the property owners are having to pick themselves up by the bootstraps, and so they're always being asked for more taxes, and that gets old. And if you don't, if you're not cautious, then you could end up with a tax revolt. Now, that's not necessarily good, but you've got to be careful about that. So I absolutely agree with your notion that you ought to look at return on investment value and take a somewhat conservative approach, and then demonstrate that you, one more time, which you've done in the past, but demonstrate one more time that you make a commitment, you're accountable, and then bring it back for renewal if that's the case. And if not, then don't bring it back for renewal. So I would actually argue for option one because of that. And what I was impressed with today, and looking at because this is the first time I saw that piece of the proposal, that option one brought a lot. It really, you did really well on coming up with an expenditure plan. So lay it out, and that's a lot, return on investment, and you have the advantage that you have a history of success with your libraries. You've got high satisfaction with your libraries. So again, don't ask for everything, and make it perhaps a little shorter, and just demonstrate and be very specific. But you're right, that's one of the reasons I look at that post, and it goes down, and it's above threshold, but it still goes down. So that would concern me.
So you didn't necessarily have this list of services that would be added if the library levy was passed?
We tested a lot of them, and yes, we did, which is why we came back. For example, one of the recommendations this shows is it's not about adding new libraries, new branches, as much as we'd all like to do that. That's not what it's about. It's about providing better hours, longer hours, better services.
Great, thank you.
You did test them.
So I have George Polling and Greg Evans in the queue. We've got about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to go make a couple comments, and I'll pass it on to you, George. So I want to add my voice to as specific as possible, and I don't know how much more specific we can get, but I'd be pressing that specific as much as we can. I also think it's important to not frame this as dire.
You're right.
I just think that's not a winning position. And I also think it's about our future and our kids, and that is a winning thing, and that is looking out to a better time and all of those kinds of things.
By the way, and your seniors.
And I also think you ought to, and you've done it beautifully with this, we're actually responding to a public request. This isn't something we came up with out of the air or our own wishes. It's something we heard the public say they want, and they've been saying it ever since it went away. So this is our effort to give the public what they say they want in a way that they want it, and to tell them exactly what they're going to get and deliver. So I think you've all hit those marks, but the more we can hone in on that. This isn't about us, it's about you. It's not about now, it's about the future, and it's really about what we want for our kids and our families. There's nothing more important. That's why we're here. George Poley.
Thank you. I know we haven't taken any formal action to actually say, yes, let's move forward with a ballot measure. But if we do, I would just like to put a challenge out to the scores of people that showed up at previous budget committee meetings and begged us not to cut the swimming pool hours and volunteered to help if a serial levy went out for the library if we didn't cut the swimming programs back. So I think now's the time for them to start thinking about stepping up and fulfilling their promise to us. There's a large pool of volunteers out there, so to speak, and I think we need to really take advantage of it.
Great idea. George Evans, Greg Evans.
It's all G's. Yeah, my grandfather was George, so, I can't underscore more what Chris's point was earlier, particularly with the road fund bond measure back in 2012. We were very clear about what we wanted. People got what it was that we were telling them that they were going to get, and you've seen the results with, roads being rebuilt, roads being, potholes being fixed, overlays being done, and a schedule of road improvements that are going all the way out to like 2018, 2019. And this is the same thing in a lot of respects. It's not a bond, it's a serial levy, but what we have is, clear, tangible benefits that people can get their head around. We have a clear return on investment that people are going to get. And we're going to have an increase of 20% in capacity, which is critical. We always have to have some kind of updates. Most of us around the table are homeowners. We have to continually invest in our homes to make sure that they're continually upgraded and maintained. You got to put some paint on the house every once in a while. And every once in a while, you may have to add, something to a room or whatever the case may be to not just enhance the value of your property, but to make it more livable. And that's what we're doing with this particular proposal for a serial levy. We're making our libraries more livable, more usable, more workable, and more in tune with the times of the 21st century, which we have to do. I can't stress enough how many people that, I know, and students that I have at Lane that, don't have computers at home. They rely on libraries, whether it's at school at Lane, but mostly in the community. And, a lot of people, those of us who do have computers, take it for granted. And the library presents an incredibly strong link to the quality of life in our communities. And I think that we need to understand that. And the last, that's the last point that I had. So
I would say that what we heard today, let's keep the conversation going. I think we heard leaning towards option one and a whole lot of things about what it should be that you've heard said by just about everybody. So is there anything else that you need from us today? Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, we'll just come back on July 13th with a more fleshed out version of option one with more specificity. We'll go back and think more about the accountability piece because we did hear that often, and that's what we'll come back with on the 13th for your further thought.
Appreciate the presentation. Thank you all very much.